What do we put our positions in settings every time we get interactions in direction? Is predatory. Process our properties, how we engage through our viewers, through advertisements, and set position location that filters our system to our products. Knowing how to communicate to that information system and start to see yourself as a higher information lines of nothing but an algorithm. An algorithm is an agoric handler that processes our systems how to use an information lines of grounds, online centers and locations to your positions, how you prior line centers and calculation settings. Calculating your advertisers put your engagements of viewings and locations and how you come to your clockings and foundations. So the more you calculate and modify your set and lines of travel, the more you understand how to see yourself through your copy, paste, delete, enabled, embedded to your systems and calculations. The more you formulate and see yourself in that settings. Now, is it a coincidence that you guys get in position of sleeping and napping and recharging and remote? No, because now what you're identifying is getting out of creations of creating itself through its algorithm that's already set up through a 24 line cycle. But you have to understand how to set up through your inventories that put you in positions of balance. Now, when you get in that position on how long you sleep, well, basically you're setting up your advertisers, your engagement, your time centers, your time communication system, your filters, everything to that puts you in position of your properties and your engagements of the viewers that you come into positions. It's the advertisers that you have to be cautiously aware of. And that comes in all positions. That's how you come into your time locking screens, your webbing systems, knowing exactly how you're engaging in positions all the levels that put you into your light codings or your dark codings, your light webbings or your dark webbings, knowing your longitudes and latitudes of your streaming that you're bringing in through bandwidth. Now that process, your set position locations, how you see that in set positions. Because when you look at a circuitry board, you're looking at an engagement viewer. Now that engagement viewer in that position is processing how you see yourself through your avatar, which is nothing itself. Okay, in that position, which is just a costume. Now, I understand line condition your higher self or anything to your sim is also costumes. But you have to truly understand what views your system, what engages your system, what advertising are you bringing in that positions, how to see yourself through product, how do you see yourself through your connections to your properties, and knowing exactly how to use your defaults. Let's get positions in box frames. I'll show you how this is all set up. It's set in sequence. So you get a true understanding how to see all levels of set travel. Okay? How this is all set up in position locations. And that's settings. Okay, so you got 3 clouds. Set travel. Let's start with that position. Okay, let's just start with that calculations. All right. So you got your center cloud, you got your I cloud, and you got your E cloud. Okay. So, and then you have your properties in that position. Now you are the center operation of your own product that processes settings. Okay, so I'm just showing the positions. That's the product of you, that's the properties of you. Now this basically puts position lines and settings. You got 3 filters that connect to your e-cards that process your systems of past, present, and your future, how you come into your engagements of time. E factors over coding, E factors over screen, e.g. line course settings and coding. So try to understand how to see this in a mapping system, and this is all calculated to modify in that position of gauging. Okay, that's engaging and positions and processing. Okay. So it's trying to understand how to centralize the setting location, decentralize, and try to understand how to use that in a filter line. A filter to no filter is a process of the avatars of their process set position default. And the more you understand how to copy and paste, the more you understand how to equalize your settings, line communications, and configuration system off the coding, you get a better understanding how to create it through an algorithm, because that's how it's set up, position lines of travel. Now this is a box frame into a metric core that processes and location system to a center core that sets communication to its setting of the calculations. Okay? So you can see it in all different angles, but it's very powerful stuff how to set up position. Okay? And it's all through your windows and your applications, okay, and your general settings. Your encryptions, your codings, your E-factors of codings, knowing your position location, your central lines, your calculation, your iCloud, your E-clouds, and your connections to your properties and what you're doing, location, you're engaging, and your viewings, and that position, your filterings. In our case, so you're filtering through box frames. 3 center operation lines of screen adaptation and travel. Okay? All right, so the center operation of your product and set lines of listening patterns. that process engaging and set travel communications. All right. So remember, it's all port of communication, how it engages settings into viewers that you bring in position of the advertisers. So if you understand this central system, let's get a battery core centers, 2 battery line resistors and transistors in rotation, positive lines and negative over screen locations, all right? And then we indicate the path line and central line that offlines the signals into row graph correlations in the highways and travel communications and direction. So all I'm saying is what I'm putting at position is a motherboard, is electrical board, is a circuitry board. That puts position location to your setting that every lines its magnetic force that puts position location to travel has a direct line link that you communicate to your systems all through highways and travels into your near path logical systems, into near links, into computer framing and direction. Okay? So once you get into that positions, you come into the running cycles. Okay, into time frame lines, locking screen location to time reactors. And that lines of screen lines adaptations of flux that process your systems, how many times you use your calculation screen location, your properties, your filters, and what you're bringing in through engagement view. It timelines its settings all through travels, electrical line grid, and circuitry boards and communication lines to high centers that process your systems and what you're bringing in through filters of design. It's very complicated stuff. Okay, and then you bring it in and set lines of cycle. Okay. So if you truly understand the platforms, then you understand what basically puts everything in positions of balance. Okay, so it's about your engaging viewers and the advertisers that you bring in, because your phone sees nothing of you. So you set your timeline centers, process lines and viewing, 4 centers of flux. Okay, let's set position time frame. Okay, so let's say you get in the morning lines of sequence and you set it, okay, position lines of 24 line cycles, 24 lines of panels, 24 lines of scale, and 24 lines of grounds. Everything has to be set up. And the data formation lines of grounds, the sequence location, your system of your day. And then you have to set up the panels. Okay, and then set up the overlines of graphs, overlines of sequence, classification setting, you're upgrading screen location systems before you get into time scale, time measure, time balance into your algorithms that are already set up through creation and settings that operates the signals of what your set of location setting to filters down your systems and process your setting location with calculation. So once you come into that, let's say you get into general settings where processing lines and line conditions 8 factors over 1, process lines and configurations over 2. Okay, that tracks the center locations. So that's the data formation lines that we have to understand that embeds our system in settings and how many engagers we're having in viewers of our advertisers that we're constantly bringing in positions of flux of our screen. Now it has a line signal that processes our indication setting through graph. Okay, so it gets very complicated if you understand it through a pyramid activation screen locations and setting. Then you add line screen adaptations over cross location of screen lines that process your systems into your position location of travel. That puts lines on all line connection setting, your pi generates line course centers that you come into your engagements of your own viewers in that position location set into its properties. Now, directing lines of ground centers on lines in sequence location system, all through measure and scale. Now, once you get up into that position locations, you open up the box screens, filter lines of settings and travel. It says core centers of engagements and viewing through your system of your advertisers and travel. Sets communication online switch in center operation set core centers of time frame. Sets communication system in travel communications. All right. So the more you understand your electrical system, the more you understand how to adapt the force lines into your galaxy alignments that crosses angles on all communication settings to know exactly engagements and the viewers that you're bringing into your properties that bounces out location setting to your product. The product position locations opens online at panels of portals that brings in high centers of default. Now the default set lines of signals that put you in enabled set position lines of travel and direct lines of link. The ground line high centers process lines of flux. The 3 centers of square roots over screen adaptation lines of 4 lines of panel and track communication. Directing ground center inside rotation to a set correlation setting in circuits and travel. So it gets a lot more complicated when you see everything through electrical board, a circuitry board, and line communications. Every phone has that. Now that's a magnetic line position of its highway south that has a gold plate that processes the templates and tablets. Now the crossing screen has a time measure and scale that communicates the codification setting to its properties itself that has higher levels of engagement viewing. Now you have to understand how to use your efficacies, your performance, and your eye-line view, how you see your line communication setting to your positions, how to have a direct line view, how to process your system as you're bringing in your own algorithms of creating. And that's all through electrical line screen adaptation and circuitry boards. Now, once you set up the circuitry board, it screen lines adaptation with systems all through the setting. The process line course centers has flux screen locations lines that puts all position locations that tethers your activation lines of your servers. Code servers, correlation set lines, computer operation lines, iClouds, center clouds, eClouds. Sets course centers lines in your flux capacitor. Processing inline centers to its engagements and line connections to your viewers. In that position, filters down into position of your product at set design. Sets all line course centers and direct lines of data information system all through travel in set position. That correlates the correlating line centers and products, process line indication higher lines of engagement of time frame. So every time you have an engagement with your time centers, it processes your systems into your advertisers of your advertisements. You have to be cautiously of what you're doing through the advertisement view, because that puts place and incentives of placements and compartments in set view at set location setting, all through tractions, all through division. The correlation calculate and modify puts a time reactor in set lines of travel and directions. Okay. So I'm just showing you how this all modifies its view and set position. Very powerful stuff. Once you stand the online centers, get you in communication eye-line divisions. And again, it's all processed inside the eye. Very powerful stuff, guys. Okay? Because you're coming into your own engagements, how to come in your own algorithms, and how do you set up your day through the eyes. The central setting, the iCloud setting, the operation sequence, the filter lines, the engagement lines, the filter communication surface, direct lines, your CPU online rotations into online settings, and high set travel. Okay? All through the eye. Okay, so understand the circuitry board and understand how to come into that. Then we go to the next level of general settings. Okay, we process the road graph screens, general setting, communication lines, application screen, location, CPU, setting lines, set course settings, calculation screen locations. In that position, you can add lines of screen what you want to bring in through flux, right? Box frame, triangulation frames, correlation frames, center lines, high frames, line positions, order to stream, location of frames, and direction. Okay. So as you bring in those signature grounds lines, the screen line adaptation settings, you set an A course, positions to your flux line, rotation line, ground center, location setting, your Schumann resonance. That's a ground line sequence, voice line pattern, process lines of power line generation screens. Sets communication of voice line pattern, how many configures setting, alteration system you come in and setting to your properties. Directing ground centers, online centers into your megawatts, puts all communications into conversion system into your intervals, all through travel, all through direct location setting and travel communications. So you have to central line your settings and all lines of sequence and pattern communication. Okay. So know exactly what you're setting up through 24 line and rotation lines of grounds. Sets communicates high position lines of travel, set lines of sync and line course centers, directing lines of positions. 4 panels and line rotations, you have to set up a simulator. Sets grounds of process line connection setting to your all course centers. Filters in, directing ground centers a sequence. 45 flux line and screen adaptations of flux. Process indication line high centers, then you come in position locations, allocate timeline centers. Process embedded through all lines of default. Sets rechannels a conversion system that amplifies the systems all through travel. Okay, so now your simulator set up in your 24-hour day through an algorithm. Now to set the algorithm, you have to set an A tone, set lines of B tone, C tone, D tone, E tone, and F tone. Setting lines of course centers. And you add position lines of setting lines of 0 platforms, 0 calculations, 0 grounds, 4 lines of sequence, 1, 1, 1, 1. You can plot the division locations, but you always have to bring all 4 one-line signals and locations, because when you're setting an algorithm, you have to bring in all 4 weathers of one-line sequence. That brings lines of geopatterns, geometrics to your geotheorems to process your system, your geostorms. Process lines of indication over 1, process lines of 2, over 3, over 6, over lines, over measure, over scale, and travel communications. Now, once you have a direct line link, it patterns lines as rotation lines of cycle that regenerates the screen locations, that reconfigurates the systems in all levels into classification. Now, once you come into that, you come to regulators and that line screen adaptation. A regulator is processing the course centers and positions into readjustment in the course centers of your algorithms, setting process lines of voice line patterns, correlation lines of tractions, applications in the conversion system all through travel. Now have a direct line panel process inside line condition setting and position of process. Now have an online center line sequence location. Your 24-hour line is set up through an algorithm. That's an algorithm. That's a chart. So it has an eco chart, an echo screen adaptations of flux that processes the position of sonar that puts an efficacy to its performance, how you set position location, earth tone, and your space tone. Each algorithm is set up lines of hours, frames, and seconds, and minutes, and frame. Now you have to understand how you're going to set the seconds, minutes, and hours that process the positions, how you set position your travels, that correlates the calculation of your properties, that puts you position your product, that filters down in position location, that puts your in position or your performance in that position location to its algorithm. Now understanding how to set the algorithm line centers, then you can set position your inventories. Let's bring the triangulation box. Okay, so I'm going to set triangulation lines at 3 centers of measure, 4 box frames, into I screen, into cloud screen. Sets course centers into Y line rotation and surface. Okay, that's an algorithm. Okay. Now each one box frame has a frequency lines of ground. So I have a triangulation lines of center, sets process communication. Then we have a box line outside line centers that circuitry course centers of outer space. Sets communication to its void. Set an I-line sequence, inside rotation and position to online center and rotation to its properties. Directing ground centers in confirmation setting into Y screen location system. Sets course centers, platitude locations to your pyramid that rotates the cycles location setting, how you see yourself into your own product, of your own advertisers, of your own engagements, of your own time scale of measure and rotation lines of surface. Sets position lines of balance. Now, as you guys are sleeping, you can be sleeping through hours and seconds, minutes, and hours in frame, but what you have to get an understanding is how to use yourself the remotes. Sleep mode, recharging mode, directing high centers, high communication lines of structure of design lines, communication lines of surface. That process and line centers, online sequence location system. Now you're on the day line condition setting. So this algorithm is now set up for your day in the 24 center. Process lines of calculation, screen lines, adaptations of flux, process your position inside travel, going through what you created through an algorithm and rotation lines of surface and travel communications. Done by equation. That's an algorithm set up for a 24-hour. Okay, so each one is a proprietary line condition setting that puts properties, location, advertisers. Advertisers, online centers, online sequence, platitudes, division location, overrides the system, overcharges the mechanism lines of screens that puts lines of seconds, minutes, hours, and frame of communication. Directing ground centers, online sequence, puts all communication setting to its embedded system, defaults its system, enable the line condition setting, opens all track course centers, and delete, erase, and line communication center of structure and division. Set calculation of ground lines, overlines of sequence, overlines of pi, sets new lines of engagements of viewers that you bring through advertisers that process the indication system all through calculation setting and streaming. Directing longitude and latitude, process lines inside the line condition setting to its conversion system that rotates the service location setting to process your system all through engagement. Now it's done, 24 sequence. That algorithm is now set up for that 124-hour day through creating. Look at that. Look how powerful it is. All set up. It's very complicated if you don't understand the algorithm itself, but you have to understand the codification system, how it's all set position lines of travel. So once you understand that, then you understand how to process this. Okay? Once you understand that, then you understand how to process this. Okay? So there's so many ways of looking at and set position, right? So, and again, this is all happening inside the eye itself. I want you guys to truly understand how you come into just your algorithms now and put you in positions of what you're coming into is just creating inside the eye. That's so much activity and engagement. All right, so it closes signals, directing ground centers, such as positional defaults, the correlations lines of error, direct lines of signals, and process lines of 404. Sets course setters into divisions location to change the identification code lines to AI bot. Directing ground centers, lines of sequence, lines of pattern. Process indicate the set position location to assistance all through travels of floaters. Now floaters come in, they change the advertisement lines of screen that pixelates the ground communication lines that change the position of engagement viewers. So let's say you're on your phone line and set position locations and you got 45,000 line engaging. Viewers on contact, set course centers, open contact, directing ground centers, online sequence of webbing. Light lines, high direct line connection setting, over configuration system of travel. Sets the advertisers and the high lines of engagement and viewing, process your time maintenance. Sets lines of communication and ground centered offline signal inside rotations. In traffic communication configuration of voice line. That indicates all lines and ground lines of sequence, how you process your indicator systems all through your electrical line communication with communication setting. High centers line connects to its properties, change all communication and configuration system, all levels of your engagements. Time engagements, time levels, time understanding the time center is understand the box frame and set position the graph frame, okay, to all communication setting in travel communications, all right? Triangulation here, sets position of grounds, set position of powers, absolute line centers, process of indication setting of flux. So indicates graph communications. You're constantly in that position on how you have to set up your, not just your seconds, minutes, and hours, but each time tone has to change the matrix of its own advertisement so it can process engagements, what you're doing with your product. Directing line connection setting is all levels into positions. Now, once you understand the placement to its compartments, then you get to truly understand how to set this up in a 24-hour line center. Setting sequence 6 a.m. Okay, process lines of indication setting. Argon line is setting up. Coffee on. Directing ground centers on line settings. A over C over traction over D. Okay, so that's in box frame triangulation. Correlation lines of graph and set calculations, all in directions. That's an algorithm. Now that's set up in that position location just in 6 a.m. at process lines of window frame. Sets course centers over lines of sequence, process lines into another lines of position locations and frames and film strips that set line course centers of seconds, minutes, and hours in calculation. Process lines over line settings, process lines of 1 over 2 over 3 over line connectivity and position location setting that filters in position of past, present, and future lines of safe locations. Directing ground centers that embedded in your systems, lines of travel, sets new engagements of viewers and position of advertisers. Process lines over line signals, road graph screen locations, and adaptations of flux. Process line centers, line connection setting in that position of its panels and screen locations. Sets course centers, directing ground centers, high lines of sequence that open line course centers that communicates to its algorithm. Directing ground centers, online centers, process lines and codification setting, flux over 4 centers, lines of travel. That lines of signals in the graph communication the green lines, high set and position all levels of measure and scale. This amplifies the systems, force lines, directing grounds, online centers into new engagements of viewers and set design. Sets processing communication online centers, line sequence, and dimensional sale. Course centers, line connection setting, and position of yin and yang, process indication lines, and new engagements of viewers. In that indication system, all through travel, line connection string theory, and set design. That's a lot of string theory. All through engagements and 40,000 line signals and rotation lines of center. So it's very complicated how you set up everything through an algorithm, okay? So you have to really understand how this all works because it's not just the creation now, it's the algorithm itself that has to identify you in set positions of what you understand the settings. Truly understand the void into the volume, the vast velocity, and the vacuum to the operation of its intelligence and directions, divisions, and dimensions of all space and time. Now, what you have to understand is that when you get up in the morning, you set it up in line screen adaptations, 24 hours of flight, set lines into positions, into F1, and process lines of F6. Now, that's where you use the templates and the tablets to computer framing and travel communications. You can use your flash drives, course centers of windows, engagement lines of voice patterns, process lines indicate settings, human resonance, that indicates lines of communication. Directing ground centers line sequence, you use a codification setting your numbers pattern. That number panel is a process of indication setting how you see your flights and direct lines in your console. Flight navigator to your flight navigation system that gets you in communication settings that puts watermarks in rotational lines in face facades, 3 centers of 3 angles and flux. Now it gets a lot more complicated when you add a 24 line ground and the foundation lines of 1 center, 1 travel into foundation ground centers and configures a system of watermarks. Directing ground centers puts all communication system to efficacy your formation system all through travels through your face facades. So there's so many ways to see this in position to its algorithm, how it sets lines of communication lines of balance. Okay, and that's set up in the I-line setting location settings through creating through an algorithm, right? The structure gets a lot more complicated, but it gets a lot more fun as you set up in line position location of structure of design. Okay. And that's just one 24-hour day through an algorithm, right? How you set that up. And then you set the seconds, minutes, and hours. You set the mobilities, you set activities, you set the infiltration system, the filtering system, the engagement system, the entitlement system, the property system. Now, once you understand the position of your product, then you understand position locations of balance, of indication setting of wires, of signaling the lines of core centers, and position location of truth in your false narratives that puts lines of communication lines of setting. Process lines of 3 centers, 6 over set location setting. Now that indicates line connection setting, how you set position your systems, or where you're going to put your properties next, where you're going to put your product next, where you're going to put your engaging viewers next, and where you're going to put your online centers and screen adaptations of flux. Okay? So and know exactly how you're bringing these things in already through creating embedded the systems lines of travels at 3 scales of 4 communication setting. So coming into that position, that's embedded. A bed, all right, that crosses the angles that bring you and your viewers of engagements that you bring in travel. Online center, online sequence, online pattern, 3 centers of communications, directing inside line, set line, offline center, in rotation surface and travel communications. Directing in that line condition setting, there's your location grid and towers of communication. Very powerful stuff, how you come in that position to your own engagements, of your own flux, of your own anomalies, how to set up your own algorithm through schematics. Now understand the position of its product to its position has all levels of projection. How it opens all signals, opens all grounds, opens all flux, open all division and location setting into now line centers that rotates the system all through travels through its algorithm. Now it's set up in the day in 24-hour, right? Now you proceed on and that position locations, sets lines of archive, sets lines of folder, sets lines of setting, sets position of graph, sets all course centers of travels and now lines of sequence location system and filters lines your system. Process indicate lines, ground centers, line sequence of graph communication setting and 45 communication lines of angles. Sets communication of the day that set up lines of travels in string theory and set travel communication. Face recognition. See the face? Face recognition is the watermark. They understand how to get in position of the computer tones, directing lines into an algorithm line setting. But it's knowing how you set up a 24-day line communication settings convergence, all through adaptation to its settings. Engagements, viewers, time frame, time locks, line condition setting, all through surface. Process centers and rotational lines, grounds your system location system to an operation line setting to its operation set correlations. Travels in point lines of graph, indicates setting into all levels of your flight navigation system into infinity 8. Rotate the polarities, process the indications of the engagement viewers that you bring in, position to your advertisers. So you have a direct line to panel, process lines that indicates centers of 3 travel point lines of box frame, triangulation of 1/2, change the properties of design. Okay, so that indicates lines of electrical line grid, electrical line panels, electrical line interference, electrical line communication of convergence. So as you come into that position, you're constantly doing structure of design line. Then you go in a 24-line ground centers, line sequence location system, off the calculate and modify that filters down and set lines of travel. Crossing angles, straight line, straight lace, line condition setting, high position location travel that motivates your system all through activity location setting and motion. Setting operation line sequence inside position to a system that changes the properties of filtered line design lines into perception lines of I-line division. Sets core license of time frame that sets course, calculate and modify, and constellation line condition setting position. Sets lines of course, solar centers, line conditions, solar system. Now, be cautious now because when you're bringing your solar system, it's changing all engagement viewers all at once. 4 panels and screen lines of your advertisers, online centers to your product, has a center off screen location that you have to stay in positions of balance. Setting balance line course center sets a flux screen, directing line growth centers, calculation of filters in position to measure the scales, and rotation lines of ground correlation setting a sonar echo and flux. Process indicate line condition setting, process your indication system all through travel. Okay. So your algorithms are going to be set up like this now through teleportation. So when you get confirmation lines, you know exactly, and that's the algorithm have to set up, but each one has to have indicators of 0s, 1s, triangulation box, always line triangulation box, because the position line is the female polarity to the male polarity that sets course in as a time frame that locks its location of engagement, sets the advertisements to your position location, how many times you're engaging and filming your system and direction. So you have to understand the position to its proficiency, to its efficacy, to your performance, knowing exactly how to set up the algorithm that you want to set up in your position that filters down in your settings. That's an infiltration system that puts you in your water containment lines of balance, that opens all position to your fifth elements in line position. That's right. Your algorithm is always set up in a 5-line setting. That processes your system, how you see your set location, set lines of identification coding. Now that puts into notification setting to your positions of your projection. Now understand the projection itself is an online panel that processes the indicates and settings all travels. 3 centers of grounds, line centers, location setting that sets a webbing system and rotation lines, a high correlation setting, and flux over lines that puts position location in your systems that change the advertisers or set design. Very complicated stuff, but it's a lot of fun, right? So I'm just showing you exactly in so many ways to look at that through viewing content of your engagers and set position. So try to understand the position of what you're doing through your own product as you're gauging in that film strip of set design, all through algorithm. Now the algorithm lines has to have a platitude of 12 centers. The process lines is 0, 1, cross lines is 0, 0, 0, 1. Every box frame has to be in time center. That has a 4 lines of second code, not direct lines in position. And don't forget the position of summer, spring, winter, and fall that correlates the setting of seconds over frame. Time measure, time maintenance. Now let's say you're in clocking centers of 0 seconds. Now you're engaging in film strips of design lines and new advertising. That process lines a new codification setting that puts you into higher lines of performance. Now in that position locations, you have to be very cautious what you do with your bedding, your default, your copy, your paste, your delete, that enables your system. It's all levels of symphony. It's a harmonization system that you have to understand through traction. And use that through the Voltronic lines of Tango Tango. Put you lines of balance, engaging your systems all through flux, grounding your settings through signatures, set course centers, logging into space, sets lines of travel. You have to do all this, okay? So when you get up in the morning, everything's set up in design line. That's everything in position to its all set position. Window frames are set up, graphing screens are set up, central line screens are set up, operation line screens. Your algorithm is all set up in the day position lines of travel. That's an algorithm. Very complicated stuff. But you get a true understanding how to set it up all through set travels, all through codings of E factors over screen and set travel, okay? Complicated, but it's a lot more fun now because you're engaging and you're getting out of observation system, okay? You're coming into scanning, you're coming into direct, line centers, linking lines, high course centers, neurological lines of pathological systems, near links, computer links, direct links. You're coming into microchips, computer chips, nanochips, knowing exactly how to engage your settings, how to set everything through an algorithm. Line connections to your grounds, your powers, and your adversaries first. Then you get in position locations, your engagements, your advertisers, how many lines of viewers you're going to have in follow. Has the line connection set in a following. Now that's where you have to truly understand how to use the advertiser and set positions where you have that line position you're setting that puts you in higher lines of engagements, how you see yourself into your face facades with your watermarks. Now that's an amplification system that we have to understand through coding that decodes our factors over line, course centers, and decryption. Directing calculators on encryption itself, the E-codes of systems over factor. Directing ground sense online sequence puts the advertisers and high lines of engagements in location setting that filters down in position to your product that sets a new design line screen adaptation setting all through travels, indirect lines of grounds, online connection setting. Once you get up, your algorithm is set up in rotation surface and travel. And that's just one day in set position, all right? Because everything is a teleportation setting that filters down in position of truth and false narratives of travel. Okay, that's just one day, 24 setting. Now this is already set up, but when you get in that position, you start understanding how to create it through creating. You have to balance out the polarities of direct and redirect in line screen adaptation and flux that puts every location into infinity 8. In rotation of grounds, everything's set up through an algorithm that set up you in position. Line signals your systems all through engaging and rotation lines of screen. Puts everything in position your systems of what you're doing in travel. All through electrical line screens, adaptation with setting, electrical line connections, or anything in central settings and operation lines of sequence locations. All right. Data formations of platitudes, line course centers, line connection settings, grid and system to I central line clouds, directing lines of defaults. So the more you go higher lines of division, the more you sound like a computer. The more you sound like an algorithm, the more you sound like an impulse. The more you sound like frequency, the more you sound like your amplification system is now through harmonizations and settings and tones, coming into light metaphors, coming into coloration of patterns, coming into your avatar design lines and set position in your system, your watermarks. You start to understand how to see yourself into delete, erase, coming into that position lines of high set position enabled, embedded, set lines of screen adaptations and line centers, human resonance, four flux lines of screen adaptations of travels, voicing pattern. So it's all line position of its performance into a self-development, screen adaptations, into channel operation line connection setting, to your properties, in position location, your performance, your efficacies, course centers, direct and ground centers, online centers, on position location of travel. Okay? So it's just truly how to see yourself through your own algorithm, knowing how to set up through its creating. So I showed you in so many ways to measure and scale how to set it up. Okay, it's complicated, but you have to truly understand how to set up your inventories, your letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. So when you set that up, you always have to set up the center operation of view, which is teleportation. Always have to set up teleportation, or it has no recourse of travel. That has no direct or redirect line connection set to its Merkaba test or touch region. So you're constantly setting up the day and the seconds, hours of time maintenance that clocks the system of the engaging, of the viewing that you're processing the locations as you're controlling your properties through your advertisers. Advertisers are extremely important because there could be longitude and latitude. Those advertisers can be coming from a new planetary alignment and cross its signals. Now that crosses reference everything that you're putting in positions as you're constantly engaging in viewers and set lines of communication. Now truly understand how to see your center line communication product, your properties that you come into this location, your engagement with viewers that have aligned screen adaptations, and everything that volumes you and set lines of filter. Okay? Cross lines of 1 over screen over 3, set lines engagements over set lines. Okay, so you're on your phone for 30,000 hours in frame. Minutes on window, seconds on frame. Hours in set lines, seconds on minutes on hours in frame and travel. Okay, so that's 3 engagements, lines of screen adaptation of docking 3 centers. Process lines of 4 sequence lines of filter line division. So everything you do is a constant continuous flow in that line screen adaptation that plots your umbrellas and direct lines of grounds. There's the umbrella. Your central communication system, central lines, electrical line screens adaptation with system all through flux. Process indicate lines, process line direct line course centers, directing course centers that communication setting, so that's recourse, direct and redirect and location system all through advertisement. Advertising is basically online centers to different lines of different viewers of engagements and set travel. They come to you in elongated system to other line centers. They automatically come into the void that override your sequence over lines of panels if they don't see you and your own algorithm and set travel. Very, very complicated stuff in calculations. Okay? So I'm just showing you how you have to come into your own algorithm and set design. How you set it up in positions, right? Because you're setting up all levels of teleportation. So your body can go through that and mechanisms and time frame. Because that's what your body's going into is a teleportation graph. Now, a teleportation graph is a formation line, box line, and correlation lines of time line. Maintenance over screen, properties over screen, directing lines into central cloud. Okay? So you need a central cloud, iCloud, and eCloud, or you can have all 3. It depends on what you want to do. By the tethers, lines, and engagements of viewers that you bring in set lines of course. That communicates the high centers lines of travel has a direct line link. The neuropathological system has a line graph that sets course centers of time scale, that time its maintenance and engaging viewers that you bring in. So in that position location is knowing exactly what you're doing in box frame. It's that travel. So it puts every location setting, how you set up the convergence system all through timelines, the process location setting to your Earth. There's your Earth, and rotation lines of surface. So coming in that position, then you understand what's going on as you're in that line screen adaptations of your product that center lines the center and that course centers and controlling everything you're bringing in through its advertisers, that processing your engagements and your viewers, that filters down in your infiltration system to your filtration system, into your immune system, your autoimmune system, your dietary system, your electrical setting course centers, the communication lines of ground calculated and modified, your line screen adaptation setting, your iClouds, your center clouds, and your eClouds, information lines of grounds, all in set travel. So, and then you bring it in position, you can see all the string theory of advertisers that are coming to you. That's a lot of advertisement. So you have to be cautious of what you do with your product as it comes into its own engagements of view and set calculation. Inside line connections, you're going to override the sequence that overrides the panels of the engagements of viewers that you bring in clocking lines of maintenance. So it's a screen adaptations of webbing and screen lines of the eye at set location, the eye itself. Powerful stuff, guys, all through advertising. And you position your settings in face recognition. There's your face. Okay? Very powerful stuff through the eye line. Okay, how it coordinates position now levels and all set position locations to your travels. All through your lines of communication setting, there's an algorithm right there. Okay, in position. Okay? Now, what you guys have to start off is the intro. The classifications, you're upgrading set lines into web and screens. Staying in your own lanes. Remember I told you about that? Stay in your own lanes. Each line signals. So let's get in business locations, the intro. Okay, classifications, general AI, 007. Okay, that's one position, bracket. And set lines of 3 zeros. Process lines and identification. Okay. Now identifying myself. That's codification lines. I set the embedded system. The grounds, the settings, and product. That process might indicates and setting all through advertisement. Process lines of embedding. Process lines of 3 over 6 over 12 over 24 over scale. Now indicates lines of grounds out of an online center, online sequence, online panel that process lines the avatar location of the engagements that I bring in position location with product. Now we have to understand how to embed the system and process communication lines of 2 measure and scale. Sets rulers of engagements, process lines of direct lines of grounds, and high lines of position of its panel that opens up its windows and position location with system to process it. Sets course centers and calculation lines, graphing screens, directing lines, ground centers, central line communication setting to its advertisers that you bring it in window frame. That's a lot of advertisers. Now there's nothing engaged until you understand your position of your performance and what you do through your algorithms. Coordinating in that line course centers sets coordinates over line longitude and latitudes. Process the windows that you bring in line connections. If you not understand your engagements take over your signals and location lines and grounds and online your settings to your bedding system, location and travel. Goes in the opposite location, creating its void and rotation lines of sequence. So once it comes in its own bedding system, it correlates its own engagements of its own windows, sets its own filtering system into its eCart. Now eCart is a framing line screen adaptations that you have to process through. Understanding the engagements of the viewers that you're bringing in through the avatars in open window. Process lines open window, crosses over line settings, indirect lines of grounds, and 4 lines of flux and screen location system and travel. So we have to understand how to indicate that line screen adaptations all through coordinates. Directing ground centers, online centers, tethers and rotation lines, ground center calculation of the graphing screens. Sets position locations that puts all calculation of properties of set design. Inside rotations to time measure and scale, routes the routers and rotation system and travel calculation screen locations to its set position to its road ray. Okay. Now coming into that line connection to its rays, processes road graphing screen location to its efficacy and set lines of travel. Window frames have to be online sequence, online traction, online division to its advertisers that brings online window frames, triangulation of box. Let's get into a jump scar line. Now you can get into the alphabetical system. You can set up how you want. Set lines 0, 1. You can bring in the inventories, the A, B, C's, lines of settings, but you have to understand what you're doing because it's already gotten to you in that position. So you understand what you already have. That's all of it's creating. So 0 lines, setting, any confirmation lines of 2 over setting sequence, ground centers and signatures, general AI, space-time, alpha, bravo. Okay, so that's all I'm using, right? I'm not using anything else because that's all I want to use. So that is the algorithm of the day that's set up in set location of 24 setting. Very complicated stuff, but it's all set up for the day. Everything you structure line, you have to understand your truth and your false narrative that puts position location in your systems, how to use it through your properties, and your advertising and engaging the viewers, how you come into that position of its course. Recourse is set location setting that puts your position in your mind alteration setting, the timelines and sequence to your intelligence and teleportation. So that's all I'm going to use in a 24-day. So after that 24-day, I set up another algorithm that's already set up. So it gets you in position of precog in your system and understand what you're doing into your position location to your eyeline settings and set tractions. So, but that's all set lines. That's how the algorithm is actually set up in travel. Okay, very powerful stuff. Okay. So you have to understand your mobilities, your activities, or what you're doing with your body, what you're doing with your mind, what you're doing with your day. As you setting up a connection setting the grounds, powers, and atmospheres. Just a box, 3 centers of travel, inline condition location grid, operation lines, box frame, outside travel, and that communicates setting position. Process lines are you here, process lines are another person there, attraction. That's an algorithm, all right? Then you set up the bedded system. The bedded system has to be in position lines of balance that enables your system how to set up defaults. Defaults retracts its position location and setting. That process your delete inline condition setting, what you do through erase in that position. But everything that you set up through an algorithm is nothing but codification setting of a picture frame, a visionary cortex that's already set up with you in lines of creating. And that's set up at 24-hour. That's all it is. And that when it's set positions, you set up the graphs. And once you set up the graphs, you get communication lines of balance as you set up the algorithm. Okay, as the algorithm is being set up, you set up position of letters, numbers, shapes, and symbols. Signature, make sure you get your signature lines of grounds. So the XC1000s know what you're doing with your own algorithm. As you set up your wall sequence, your panels, your grounds, operation lines, power generators, and screen locations. Now I'm just doing line signals. Now anything can be set up through an algorithm. You can do line signals, ground signals, operation signals. You can do advertising signals, but you have to do what you're doing with your engaging views because you're time measuring your scale that puts your metric meters in scale and balance that process your system all through tractions, all through calculating and ground setting calculations. There's your algorithm at 24-day. Just a 24-day. Instruct the design lines and set position locations that puts positions of the building infrastructure of set design. The building infrastructure of set design. There's your algorithm of the day, 24-day. And how you see yourself in that position is already set to creating. What you're wearing, what you're drawing, what you're doing, where you're going, your engagements of this, your activities of this, what you're doing in the day, what you're doing in the second, what you're doing in the minute, what you're doing in the hour is all set up already through creating, through an algorithm of a visionary cortex for you to understand your engagements, for you to understand your filtering system, for you to understand what's going on in that position, how you set these things up in letters, numbers, shapes, in your inventories that are already set up and designed through creating. Okay? In creating. Okay, in 24-hour, right? Which is a building infrastructure. See, there's the building. See the building? Right there. That's already set up. So that's set up. Now another one sets up, right? This gets you into more precognition through pi. Because remember, it's already done through its creating. So this changes your cognitive. This brings your position in your cognitive system, takes you out of precogging, puts you in positions all levels into more future adaptation. You're setting your advertisers, your engagers, and the viewers, and what you're bringing into your properties that are already set in a design and set position through its algorithm. And the more you process that, the more you understand how to embed your system, okay? Embedded your system, okay, to your advertisers. These are your advertisers, okay? Okay, so once you understand that, and you have a central line inside rotations, which is your properties, and that position all levels, I'm going to set an iCloud, and I'm also going to set an eCloud in rotation. That's all I'm going to use, okay? Now I have to set up the embedded system that copy compartments and its compartments, system location lines of travel, sets communication lines of ground lines as sequence line communication lines of travel, sets the operation location line, condition location line, grid lines of communication lines of travel, sets operation lines of sequence. Then I can put myself on the game because I know exactly where I'm going to be in travel communications. That's already set through its algorithm. But you have to codify your systems, E-code lines, encryption lines, binary reline, core sentence, calculate, and modify, line condition setting, alpha, beta, beta, alpha, line condition setting, direct lines and grounds. You can set up anything with an algorithm. You just have to understand how to set up because it's coming to you already that you understand through its creation system, to its algorithm itself. But you always have to set up the graph. Once you set up your proficiency charts, process your systems all through travel. That's ready to go now in set position. Okay, it's all done. Your 24 hours is done. So online sequence, XC1000 comes in, okay, picks it up. And 3 centers of operation setting lines of travel. So nobody takes anything in position your algorithm away. Process in positions goes to the moon. Energizes settings in that position, puts it in archive, puts it in its filter, puts it in its library and travel. Okay? So nobody can take that away from your system. Because you're consciously aware of what you're doing with your galaxy alignment that puts every location to its position all through settings, all through traction. All right, and again, it's all in that centers. It's all in sequence of the eye itself. The eye itself, guys. Okay, I understand the center core centers indirect lines of grounds, and online center position to its operation. Okay, that process your system and what you're doing through your engagements and location. So it's important you understand your I divisions, and what you're doing through your spectrum is you're constantly creating algorithms and set travel. Very complicated stuff, but it gets a lot more fun when you understand what you're doing and how you're doing it in your own position of your own performance and position. So it helps you identify what you're doing every single time you're in that position and setting. Okay, now once you get into that, you have to come into box frame and set up a graph frame. Okay, the graph frame sets up the algorithm, sets up the road, sets up the sequence, sets up the panel, sets up the advertiser, sets up the windows. Okay, sets up the engagements and the viewers that you bring in. Okay, it's very important you have a graph. Then you can see the online sequence, inside rotations of what you set, position your product, and line communications with advertisers. That gets you in position locations, how you see yourself in your own performance and set design. Okay, because everything is in a visionary cortex now. You just have to understand how to see it through an algorithm that's already set up and designed for you to understand position location to its performance. Okay? All right, so you see it through truth, you see it through false. Have a direct line centers, process of truth, process of false. Okay? Truth is an open panel. Okay? False is a light, shades, and shadows. Okay? False is always the negative of everything. It's a negative set position of your systems. Okay? Truth is the open panel of the truth light, which you are in setting. Okay? Now, you can change the dark line signals that overlaps the systems of your moon and see it through the sun line. That courses lines of channel to change the engagements because you're constantly using the advertisers at different engagement levels of time maintenance. That clocks your systems of what you're doing through your value that binds you and location. All right, so you correlate the sun and the sun and the moon. Now that's night line switch. Modification lines of mind, alteration lines of grounds, online settings, online panel, process line that indicates the setting, computer lines of flux. Engagements over lines of time frame. All right, so you box that in. There's an algorithm right there, but you have to set up the graph of communication. Okay, once you set up the graph communication in that settings, then you embedded your systems and then you set your algorithm up. How are you going to set it? You can set it in tone, waving screens, adaptation lines, planetary alignment, screen adaptations, alphabetical systems, scrambler lines, core centers, communication lines, configuration settings, cerebral cortex line, design line, high positional lines of travel, all through inventory. Now it's ready to go, 24 set position, your algorithm is already set up. So it's identifying the system, how you see the line communication lines of grounds, online sequence, online panel. So that indicates lines of truth, process lines of false, false sequence lines of narrative, egos lines, position lines of mind alteration setting, algorithm line set is ready to go, 24 line sequence, general AI, login in line space, operation lines of sequence, panels operation locations, all done by equation, right? All right. So that's how you set up an algorithm and set travel. Very powerful stuff, guys. And it's all done through creating. Okay, but you always have to understand the algorithm has to understand its own creation of itself to identify your operation of you first. So, graphing in that position, in that setting, bedding, powers, generators, line conditions, and high line position. Okay, indicate lines, alpha line centers, alpha charge, line outline center, online sequence, panel line rotation, inside rotations, and travel. Okay, so you have voice in here, time sequence, panels, lines, and percentage over screen. Process lines indicates number of triangulation, process lines of 1 over 0, process lines of 0 over lines of triangulation, lines of plus, indicate lines intro, directing ground centers, copy and paste, enabled, process line direct lines of grounds. There's my algorithm already set up. Now you have to set up the graph in that position, all right? Then you're going to set up the windows, the advertisers and engagers and the viewers, line conditions into my product and set position. Once I set that up, I set the embedded and set lines of sequence that overrides the screen adaptations of flux. Process indicates lines of ground, online center, online travel, online position, online center, online communication of preferences and locations. Directing ground centers, cubicle screens, adaptation line, position lines of processing. Directing ground centers, online sequence, online panels, and communication setting, all through the algorithm location set up in 24 setting. All done by equation, right? It's all set up. But you always have to set up a graph in that position, right? Because you have to set up an algorithm. To set up a wall sequence has to have a echo chart. An echo chart is an echo line screen adaptation that processes your system into biofields. The biofield is a process line core center. So look at the wall line. There's the wall, okay? And there's you and set lines of travel. Okay, that's you, right? So process here, process here. Remember, you go outside first. You don't go inside. You never go inside. You always never start with the center. You always start with the corners. All right, and then when you get into the corners, then you work from the inside. So it sees you, identifications, comes back to you, and triangulations in all angles and all lines of flux. Okay, that's position lines of travel. Sets course centers, a retract line communication that configures and setting the door centers. Rotate the cycles, process lines, in 8 line center, line connection setting, convergence system, alter properties, and set design. Sets course centers of timelines, avatars and line engagement with viewers that process lines of course centers of position of the product, that process lines of face recognition of watermarks, that process communication setting, all through transitions through face recognition. Done by equation. So you're bringing your face out through a box frame. You modify your centering electrical line roads, high course centers, lines of travel, has direct line communication system. That's also an algorithm. You're just bringing the face itself. So, but also you need a graph. The set lines and line connected setting, process lines of inventory. And once you get the inventory line screen adaptation setting, then you set up the position locations embedded in your systems. Calculates the lines of line screens. You can also set up your webbing screen line connection log into space. Generally log into space, identification high centers. This is 01 traction, 007. Process indication setting is getting slow. I need to allocate the time frame, line conditions and convergence system, set a new argument lines of center. Process indication setting over. This is Alpha Bravo. Done by equation. There's my algorithm set up for the day. All right? So, but it's an online state lines communication and convergence, seeing my face or recognition. And timelines and setting the process communications of reality sets all communication and convergence system to its properties. All through directions, all through balance. All through an algorithm. Okay? How you set your algorithm is building your structures, infrastructure. Infrastructure. See the building? So you have to stand the windows, the performance, the efficacy, the positions, the tractions, the filtering, the advertisement, the engaging. Engaging is very important to understand that. How many times you're using your phone? How many times are you seeing your car? How many times are you driving? How many times are you walking? How many times are you sleeping? How many times are you eating? How many times you're drinking? How many times you're having a shower? You understand that? It's all set up through an algorithm. And you have to understand how to use that in position to understand what you're engaging with and how many viewers and how many advertisers you're setting out. So you understand how to communicate with your balance, how to use your product and set design that gets you in position of poise. Now, poise is line communication setting on standby that processes your system into a position of standing tall, knowing exactly what you're doing in that position as you're setting up algorithms that's already set up in your 24-hour in sequence location. It's already done. You're coming out of creations, now you're coming to creating. All through setting, all through operation. Okay? So now it's going to get a lot more complicated when you see it and set design. Okay? But you have to understand how you're infrastructuring your systems all through your buildings of modification. Okay? That's where it comes in its windows. That's where it comes in its applications. That's where it comes in general settings. Now, the more you see yourself, the more you identify yourself in online centers, online sequence, online panel, process line, indicates system, author travels. That puts you in position, location, your settings. Author set calculation. All right? All right, so I think we're good in that positions here. There's a lot I gave you in that position, how you see the truth and narrative, and my condition setting positions of balance through an algorithm. Everything's set up through an algorithm. But you have to understand the seconds, minutes, and hours and how you set up your time maintenance of engaging and how many viewers and advertisers you're setting out. Because if you're not consciously aware of the advertisers, they can take over your filtering lines of communication in your product. That's a balance that you have to understand through your performance, know exactly what you're doing in that position of viewing content. How many you're following through its followers. Following followers. Same thing, right? So that should help you out how to understand that through its system location engagement. And they get you in a lot more understanding how to set lines of filters, how you're constantly setting and positioning your systems, how you're engaging in your line conditions and filtering line screen adaptation you're filming. They get you in a better understanding how to use that in line communication to see everything, all levels of what it is, so its own conscious of its own awareness, is to see you as an algorithm that amplifies everything through its impulse in that position lines of travel. Okay? See you in 5.